If you could unmute yourself, please.
Sorry, I apologize. Thanks, Etna, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. You are in for a treat. We have some of the most interesting social entrepreneurs and thought leaders in this space chatting with us this afternoon over the next hour. So to give you a little context of what we're going to do, our starting point for our conversation is, this data point from CMIE and CEDA, which is that women's employment in urban India fell by 22% in 2021 compared to 2019. At the same time, there are fewer women than ever before returning to the workplace. And in 2021, the number of job seekers, both in rural and urban India among women, fell drastically, while with men, it had the reverse trend. It actually increased. While this is a bit disheartening, and we've heard a lot about female labor force participation, entrepreneurship has shown somewhat of an upward trend. So about 20% of all entrepreneurs in India are women, roughly about 20 million. And why that's an interesting data point is because time and again, evidence has shown us that entrepreneurship lends itself well to sort of social mobility, time, spatial constraints that women typically face. And it has been a critical pathway to economic advancement and empowerment. Yet the pace of acceleration of the ecosystem, both on the policy side, on the funder side, and on the organization side, has been slow at best. So today, with the help of remarkable women on this panel, we're going to unpack some of these issues and really look at how we change the narrative to look at unlocking for mass entrepreneurship for women. So before I get started, I'd like to just take a minute to introduce the speakers we have today. So I'm not sure how it's on your screen from your left to your right, but I'll just give you name call-outs to begin with. So to begin with, we have Dr. Yamini Atmavilas, who is president of the Udayati Foundation, where she heads strategy and research. The foundation works on three areas, namely employment, safety, and agency, utilizing various levers such as building political salience, engaging with the private sector, innovating and using markets, providing seed funding, and shaping the supply chain to build the ecosystem for women in India. Prior to this, Yamini was the India lead for gender equality at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. She served before that nearly 4 years as senior program officer on measurement, learning, and evaluation. She has over 18 years experience working in this space, and I think most people in this audience and in this sector know her and respect her deeply. She has a PhD in women's studies from Emory, and she's worked on women's labor migration as a coach. Also joining us is Dr. Gayatri Vasudevan, who again doesn't need an introduction, but it feels like it's wasted not to tell you how cool these people are. So with over 3 decades of experience, both in national and international organizations, she is the chairperson of LabourNet. Prior to this, she's worked at UNICEF, UNDP, NORAD, UNESCO, and she also has over 30 publications in the area of labor and gender, really making her an authority in this space. So LabourNet, of course, is a social enterprise based in Bangalore with a clear focus on enabling livelihoods and improving real income wages of the informal sector by improving worker skill and productivity. Provides financial inclusion, social protection, and welfare services to the unorganized workers, builds capacity of workers, and markets their services to customers. So LabourNet has impressive scale and is present in 450 locations across India and has impacted over 300,000 individuals in 15 sectors till date. We'll hear more during the course of the conversation. I next want to introduce you to Ajayta Shah, again, who doesn't really need an introduction, a very much decorated social entrepreneur, but she is the founder of Frontier Markets, a social enterprise that establishes women-led distribution networks and facilitates rural household participation in the economy. Frontier Markets has sold 3 million solutions to 500,000 rural customers through a network of 10,000 Sahelis in 2,500 villages. And I'm sure that as I speak, this number has scaled exponentially. For the future, the enterprise has already chalked out a goal for a platform of 1 million rural women entrepreneurs serving 100 million rural customers by 2030. The enterprise's mission is to empower and uplift rural women through financial independence. Ajayta, of course, has been awarded by everyone, the World Economic Forum, various governments and states, but most importantly, she's cracked what for-profit rural supply chain could look like. Finally, I'm delighted to introduce Aprajita, who's also a partner organization that I work with at GAME. She is the founding partner of the Quantum Hub and co-founder of Young Leaders for Active Citizenship. which works with young people to increase their engagement with the democratic process. Before her TQH stint, she was manager of corporate affairs at Snapdeal, and she holds an MPP at Oxford. Together with Aprajita, our work currently sits at this intersection of creating a policy framework in the state of Maharashtra and also amplifying existing women entrepreneurship related policies. Finally, just a quick introduction of myself. So I lead women entrepreneurship at GAME. I have nearly 15 years of experience working in the nonprofit space, though a core area of my interest is the movement of capital, fundraising, philanthropy, and how to help sectors scale and grow fast. At GAME, of course, our women entrepreneurship work coalesces around 3 big pieces. So we look at system change pilots that can scale and create the most impact for mass entrepreneurship. We work with the NITI Aayog, we work with NRLM, and we also work with several private sector organizations on looking at how to deliver gender intentional business models. So with that, I'm going to ask Samiksha to spotlight Yamini. I also want to just take a minute to thank the Dasra team for the great tech that they've helped us with, and thanks Samiksha from the GAME team for supporting us today. So my first question is really, Yamini, opening remarks from you, but one of the questions that when we talked about the idea of changing the narrative was really, what does labor force mean and how do we define it, and has that evolved? So over to you to hear some of your thoughts on this.
Thanks, Sanjana, and thank you, Dasra, for inviting me. It's such a pleasure to be part of this panel. I think maybe I'll make 3 or 4 big remarks and then get into some of the details. So one, all women work, and more women seem to be working more than ever and multitasking more than ever before, number one. Second, I think it's worrying that official statistics don't seem to represent the quantum and the nature of women's work. And I think that's the core, one of the core questions underpinning this panel. What is that? Can we reimagine these definitions, and can we reimagine how we think about work? And all of this remains very much in the economically remunerative, or what counts as economic activities. So, even that is something that we need to unpack. The third piece I'd say is you're right in that more women than ever are dropping out of the workforce. At the same time, as I said, women are working more and more. So how do we sort of make sense of this contradiction? And for that, do we need to think about different ways of framing, not just labor force participation, but I would expand that to just this whole opening up of this question of work and opening up of this question of formal as well as informal sectors of the economy, and what are some of the trends that one is seeing. And the last thing I'll say is, I think while it's a very, very small proportion of the economy, this whole concept of gig has taken up a lot of our public imaginary, and one needs to really very thoughtfully access and sort of start to shape the narrative around what we mean by gig. Is it just a new form of informality? Is it informal in a, old wine in new bottles, informal in a new bottle, but in a slightly better bottle? Or is it a lot of formal jobs becoming more and more, even more contract-based, even more informal, etc. So I think we really need to pick up a lot of these big questions that are facing us and start to unpack and make sense of things. So I forget the order of my question, but to just say, first, what is labor force participation? I think very straightforward ILO definition is women, people who are seeking work or are currently working or seeking work in the economy at any given point in time. Definitions vary between, overall 18 to 670, or, I think ILO has a more tight definition of working age population. And so I think going by any token, whichever benchmark or definition one uses, I think the fact is that fewer women of working age are in the workforce than countries the size of India's economy, the nature of India's growth, anything that's comparable. I think we are definitely seeing fewer, the overall quantum is lesser, fewer, number one. The second is, who are those people working in the economy? You're right. And I think this panel is hitting that, the nail at the the hammer on the right nail by saying that labor force participation historically has always captured both paid work in the form of working for an employer or self-employed work, which is this large, spectrum of from self-employed to entrepreneurship. So its own account workers have always been part of measuring labor force participation. The challenge, however, comes when we get to the question of formal versus informal. And I think unfortunately, the majority of women who work in India are in the informal sector. It doesn't mean that they don't get counted. Agricultural workers, women who are working with no remuneration but on homestead farms are still counted as workers as long as they report themselves as being part of an economic productive activity. The challenge, however, comes with self-employed businesses, right? The self-employed women, which are these informal businesses. We have a major data challenge in understanding what the nature of that self-employment is from official sources. The economic census has not yet been released, but it does, the sixth economic census gives us a good sense of what that looks like. The majority of women's businesses are under 1.2 in size, right? Like 1 to 1.5 women per business. So most women work on their own. And formalization, which is, being some kind of a recognized entity within the labor force, whether within, some kind of formal counting mechanism, I think is a big challenge because there's no registration system for self-employed women, number one. And number two, finance usually is a proxy for understanding semi or some kind of formalization, and most women, despite having access in some form or the other to formal finance, and by that I mean microfinance is more widespread than non-microfinance, I guess. And even in rural, the sweep of NRLM, of SHG formation is massive, right? But then they get access to credit, but those are not necessarily translating into livelihoods. And number two, a lot of those businesses are not registered businesses. And women would rather, I think the figure you'll know the figure better, but I think 75 to 80% of women who do have some kind of self-employed activity choose to access informal sources of finance, because the costs of finance, the cost of formalization, the cost of accessing more formal systems is still very daunting. Aside from the information asymmetry, the access asymmetry, there is a massive challenge on how do you lower the cost of accessing this and making it easier for them to even A, access it, and B, stay on that ramp of formal finance. So I think all of this are pieces of this puzzle that we're trying to put together to understand what's happening with women's economic activities. I think there's lots of different perspectives that come in. There's a labor force participation perspective, there's the livelihoods perspective, there's the enterprise perspective. And I think between all of these, they all come with their own definitions of recency of work. Did you look for work in the last 3 months? According to one survey, another survey, CMIE says, I think in the last 1 week. So all of these then pose the next set of challenges around measurement, right? So which definition do we follow? And what is our benchmark of what being, productively occupied means? So I think these are all undergoing a lot of rethink right now. It's not that NSS and MOSPI doesn't capture these, but I think the way in which the coding is done of what counts as women's work is one of the challenges that even I think the recent economic survey, the chief economic advisor spoke about the need to sort of relook at some of this and be able to count women's work. I want to bring one small distinction here, which is women can work in unremunerated and what's counted as an economic activity, but that's separate from unpaid work as in care work and domestic work, etc., which we do for household reproduction. So even if we leave that out, there's more women working that are not getting counted. So I think these are some of the definitional sort of issues we're trying to sort of grapple with. And I think the whole question of do we take a space-based definition, right? Do we say I think home-based work is now becoming more and more recognized by value chains, by those wanting to understand women's enterprises. I think the term, you use the term solopreneurs. There's lots of different terms that are emerging, but at the end of the day, it's about women being able to carry out some kind of productive activity from their homes. Whether they link to value chains, whether it's about small local trades, local services, etc., etc. And I think the question for us is, how do you define this in a way that's about the activity rather than about a particular coding or a historical legacy of how we try to measure work. And last point I'll make is just on gig. And I think gig has really complicated our lives hopefully in good ways. But I think it's forcing us to relook at this boundary between formal and informal that we've historically sort of lived with. Seva has been the forerunner in sort of working on, counting and documenting, deeply documenting women's work, especially self-employed and informal work. And so, now we're in this new iteration where even officially we need to relook at what counts as formal, informal, and where does gig kind of occupy that space. Even as I said, it is a smaller part of a small part of the economy, but it is sort of capturing the larger imaginary, both on the policy landscape as well as just in our own sort of understanding of shifts in the economy. And if one goes by any of the trends that are foreseen, I think we have to really take the bull by the horns and look at these questions right now. So let me stop there in terms of opening remarks. Maybe they were a little too long, but I hope that...
Thanks, Yamini. No, but that's a perfect segue to Gayatri. I think in our conversation, one of the very interesting pieces of data you mentioned is how what qualifies as a decent income and what kind of work is formal and informal comes up. If you can share a little bit about your experience with informal work, what does that mean in the context of gig, very much like what Yamini brought up, and just your larger thoughts on the ecosystem and ideally in a woman context.
Thanks, Sanjana, and thanks, Dasra, for inviting me into this panel. So I think let me just pick up from where Yamini stopped. Literally, is when we think of wages, we normally, when we associate work, it is full-time work. So dignified work by definition for us is full-time work. And when we say full-time work, we mean somebody who goes outside and earns an income. Now, in today's context, what that means oftentimes is that anybody who's working in a city is where you have dignified work, which means technically 2.5 lakh villages cannot provide dignified work because they do not have people who can come. You cannot go to a place of work where you're doing full-time work. which again goes to the other point, is that the place of work needs to be urban, which means that your wage needs to be in the 14 to 16,000 if you're in the top 35 cities, which is what would be considered a dignified work. Now, a lot of the entry level will be at the 10 to the 14,000, which is again a wage which often is when you just enter the labor market as an apprenticeship or an intern or with minimum wage. Now, the entire full-time wage, whether it is through contract workforce, own workforce, etc., it doesn't exceed about 14-15% of the population. Now, in this, if you look at women's workforce participation, the number will obviously be very, very low because fundamentally they'll be working primarily, if you look at it, it will be the production where it's already been feminized, like for example, leather, apparel, electronics in southern India. Maybe to an extent you will have in Western India, you will have a few other sectors, but largely across India they're missing. Banking and financial sector has included women, but not in the front line. When I mean front lines, I mean feet on street, which is still very masculine. Now let's go to where does that mean that 85% of the informal sector has zero representation of women working. I mean, doesn't sound logical at all. That means they are working somewhere. If they're working, what are the wages that they are getting, and what are the wages that they can get? And I really want to spend some time on what are they getting and what can they get, right? Again, I want to just take off from what Yamini said, is the women's day is occupied with care work and unpaid work, which is accounted. There is no problem in the accounting, but she cannot access that money. For example, if she's a farm worker, if she's doing animal husbandry, she is not responsible for the sale. Anything which is related to the market, she is not responsible. But she is responsible for everything which is related to the care and the actual work which is related to animal husbandry. Similarly, if you look at agri, the tasks that she performs, because the ownership is not hers, misses out. Now, let me pick up sectors I'm familiar with, right? Kirana shops. Most of the Kirana shops in the days are quote unquote manned by women. If they are manned by women, then is that income going to her? The answer is clearly no. It becomes household income. A decade back, construction was a sector in which there were family income. There was no individual income. But today, large constructions across infrastructure and real estate has become non-feminized. That means women have been eliminated from the industry completely. They're saying, not only are you not getting paid, but please don't come either. When we're urbanizing, let's do a male migration. Let's not do women migration because it's causing us problems. Which means what is left for women? In my opinion, it's very important for us to first tackle what supplementary wage can she get and own. So traditional sectors which are going to get her supplementary income should be India's first port of call. Not so there is, what can I really aspire to achieve over a period of 10 to 20 years, and what can I do in the next 12 months to let's say 30 months. 12 months to 30 months, I think, given the low workforce participation rate, which in my opinion is simply, is she getting paid for that activity? And I'm sort of, Yamini, not going with the definition, which is the legal definition. Is she looking for work? She may be looking for work, but actually what work can she do? In my opinion, then you need to bring it down to per hour wage or per task wage, which then comes down to 3,000 to 5,000, because she is not able to move cities. And if so, how long can she move for is also issues. The last point I want to make is women's workforce participation always should be looked at in cohorts and age cohorts. What is possible 18 to 25 is not possible 25 to 35, is not possible 35 to 50. All our concentration is to see when she is transitioning from 18 to 25, which is where we are seeing manufacturing trying to feminize, warehouses and logistics sector, which is a major growth sector, feminize, retail, banking, etc. is all dealing in the 18 to 25 age group. If you extend it to what we call youth, is 18 to 29, which means when she moves into her reproductive ages, which is the 29 or 25 to 40, you immediately find full-time work. There is a significant fall, which means wage falls, the type of work falls. So supplementary work is where she comes in, because there are family necessities because of which she needs to earn. And we all know education, health, supporting the family, etc. That supplementary income is possibly the income which actually makes her a more independent person. a more confident person. Whereas our entire policy is actually geared to saying, let's see how many can move to full-time work, where we are discounting the fact that because there is a low entry barrier for supplementary work, it's not important. I think one needs to look at it from women's perspective rather than what is what's good for us. What's good for the country is possibly what's good for the woman, but what's good for the woman is possibly the most important thing that policy needs to look at. So I think let me stop there, but I think that would be where I would be.
That's a great point, Gayatri. I'm actually keen to hear Aprajita's view on the, but we'll come to that in a minute. Before that, Ajita, this is a great segue into your work at Frontier Markets. Given that a lot of the Sahelis in your network are doing this in addition to a couple of other, gigs that they have. So just can you speak about your experience and how your model has unlocked both significant revenue delta, income delta, and also just changed the sort of household income and economy in those contexts?
Yeah, and again, thanks, Dasra, for making what I think is, my opinion, a dream panel, because all of us are literally perfectly aligned in the segue of what we need to actually be sharing. So let me just first start with saying that clearly everything that Yamini and Gayatri have said, I 1000% agree with. So it's very nice to be able to not have to give yarn and context. So we just move right to the point, which is awesome. So thank you, both of you, for that. But so let me give tangible maybe examples, right? Is probably the way that would make the most sense. So, really jumping off of the point that Gayatri just made, right? Which is around the idea of elevation of income and what does that exponentially mean in terms of the context of the family that you're actually living in, and what's going on in terms of whether you're a kirana shop owner, whether you're someone who's a farmer, whether you're someone who's doing whatever the work that you're doing. At Frontier Markets, I mean, we spent like literally 2 decades obsessing over this understanding of how do we truly come in with a feminist lens to think about opportunities and why women are the critical nexus to kind of either create change, but also become the income generators of their family to create exponential opportunities for their children. What I loved, and I'm just reflecting on even what Gayatri is saying, is that like, it is an age factor also that I think is really important to take into consideration, right? When someone is in the rural context, when someone is married at the age of 14, and they are essentially tossed into, frankly, care economy, which is unpaid, for literally the next 10 years of their lives, where they are going to now do everything from household care to childcare to also farming for their family, which is consumption oriented, not sales or business oriented, for 10 years. It trains people, and also, I mean, it's detrimental in terms of psychological, like upskilling in the fastest way possible. But those same women at the age of 25 are suddenly critically involved in the self-help group infrastructure, suddenly being seen as like a central person that's going to be able to be the reason why a family gets a loan, the reason why there's certain access to services and things, but they're not necessarily digitally skilled or skilled in being able to contribute in the way they need to, or want to, or have the confidence to do so. And I think that's really where it's been interesting for us to see why women at 25, or women between, like, not necessarily adolescent only, but women at 25 coming in to 65, frankly, that have been around in rural villages in India, play a critical role in being able to contribute to income generating opportunities. And so at Frontier Markets, I mean, we started looking at things with a different lens, saying, okay, well, let's understand her limitations, and let's understand like what is not enabling her to have what we call a quote unquote typical 8-hour job. And the typical 8-hour job, as we've already said, right? It's not just about the skilling and the education. It's also just the time, right? If someone only has like 2 hours in their day to be able to be effectively productive, because they have 10 hours of the day that they're already productive, that we're not defining as productivity based on income generation, then ultimately we need to design accordingly, right? And what we've learned in our own nexus is also that for some reason, even with livelihoods as a definition that's been created in the country, we keep looking at this with a single vertical, saying one person is only good at doing one thing. But what we've learned, especially when it comes to rural women, is that they're damn good at doing 10 things. So if they're multitaskers by definition, and the biggest asset that they're actually bringing is their connection to community, why are we not enabling them to have multi-service opportunities to earn multiple streams of revenue and income in a different way? And I think that's really been the big lesson for us, which has been that don't just create a woman entrepreneur who's going to then just do digital banking or just do agri or just do healthcare services. Let us understand that she might only have 2 to 3 hours in a day, and actually let her then do all of it because she knows what's happening in the community. So today, and essentially the joke is, of course, it's updated like crazy since we've talked, is 35,000 women entrepreneurs are on a digital platform that are actually helping over 1 million families get 50 million solutions cross verticals, right? Agriculture, healthcare, digital financial services, etc. Why did it work? And I think it worked because of 3 things. One is we came in with a design perspective that said that women need to be seen beyond just salespeople or things that they can do for a long period of time, but actually see them as influencers, understand their work-life balance, and realize that even if they spend 3 hours in a day in a village, the village that they live in, they are assets that are a multitude of impact because they know those 100 households better than anyone else does. And actually, if you give them the right tools, a tech platform, give them the ability to actually get the information that all of us need, all of a sudden, you're able to build opportunities. So how might we better design solutions for rural people to create an economy is really based on this idea that you invest in women first. Last thing that I'll say is that, and just reiterating the point that Yamini, you made about the formalization of all of this, right? So what's the challenge, right? When you see everything that you said is valid, right? The cost of capital, et cetera, et cetera. So let's just take the tech solution coming in. And we were able to build the data history and still be able to give them better access to capital, better market linkages, better opportunities, which we've done. But, psychologically, we also realized that being an entrepreneur myself, I can tell you, there's a lot of other factors here that we're not taking into consideration. The second you're official, you have to deal with GST. You have to deal with reporting. You have to deal with all these other new cost elements that are very challenging. So imagine a rural woman who even is a micro entrepreneur who just wants to set up a tailoring business in her village. She will not register herself officially because she doesn't understand what it means that she's setting herself up for the next 10 years of her life. So even the micro before the macro, before the enterprise, before whatever it is that we're talking about, we just need to start understanding, I think, 3 things. 1, how do you ensure that she's able to then at least get access to social welfare schemes that helps her decrease or get access to income for her unpaid work that no one takes into consideration? 2, how do we match and map exactly what Gayatri and Yamini have said in terms of the work that she's done that no one actually is paying attention to, that is a significant contributor to the household family? So the workforce labor definition changes and she gets compensated for that. And 3, how do we ensure that given you give her the right tools and skilling, you're making it easier for her to also then be able to become a role model in thinking about how she can create jobs and create opportunities for other people. So I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Ajita. That's a lot to unpack, but thanks for the updated numbers also. I feel like it's a real testimony to what is possible when you sort of bite-size and atomize these opportunities. So just picking up this thread to Aprajita, just from the 3 conversations, the sense that I got is there's such divergent ways of cutting the segments, of looking at enterprise creation and looking at jobs. And I know part of the work we're doing together is sort of harmonizing what different ministries think about and what the government's thinking about. Just your experience on, like Gayatri said, what's the policy environment now, and how can you speak to that environment with more, innovative solutions and evidence-based inputs to guide that?
Thanks, Sanjana, for inviting me to this panel. And I have learned so much in all the three remarks that were made before me. So I'm just going to talk about, where is all of this sitting on the policy sort of ecosystem right now. And I think at TQH, what we've been doing is we've been tracking this sort of chatter both at the central level and also in a few states. And I think just from a political economy perspective, I think this whole spotlight on women-led development is very much there right now. I don't think, at least in my in last 10, 15 years since I came into policy, I have seen this kind of focus on women-led development. I mean, we started calling it women-led development now. And, it's coming right from the top. So the Prime Minister mentioned in his remarks in the last Independence Day, this whole Republic Day was about Nari Shakti. It's been mentioned in the economic survey as well. How do we count FLFPR? And I think civil society has had such a huge role to play in bringing out these numbers, in actually getting this issue out in the media and on people's mind, that why is it that women are dropping out of the workforce so much when the country's overall economic growth has been positive. So I think these are good signs. However, I do think that, political, while the intention is there, just in terms of what is the policy activity that needs to happen, it's probably not at the same level as maybe people who've been seeing the sector would like it to be. I'll just give you an example. There's been so much discussion around female labor force participation in the last 1.5, 2 years. And I think pandemic also really kind of put this front and center, because, there was a lot of reverse migration. And when reverse migration happened, a lot of women got displaced in Narega by men who were returning to their homes. So there was a lot of discussion around that. The unpaid became more mainstream than just a few expressions. For example, instruction in itself. Sorry, I think I just... One second.
Go ahead.
Where was I when you could hear me?
Care work, last thing you said.
Okay, so I was saying, so even though there was a lot of momentum, and there has been a lot of momentum and like a lot of political economic focus around it, we have a lot of action actually in terms of policy. So for example, even in this budget, there has been not too much focus on enablers of, for example, on capital expenditure spending. And the hope is that, it has multiplier effects, it will create jobs in the economy, but it's also a bit gender blind in terms of expectation of what kind of jobs will then get created. For example, Dr. Gayatri also said that a lot of women are not taking up construction work as much because it requires migration to away from homes, etc. So we need to have more focused approach in terms of what kind of sectors do we do public spending in, for example, where women can take more. If we are doing capital expenditure, are we doing it in infrastructure that can enable women to actually take up more jobs? For example, are we creating more public toilets? Are we creating creches, etc.? Which would actually enable women to take more jobs. That is something that is not coming out in as much focus as the sort of narrative that we've sort of built up around it.
Thanks. And just one comment would be helpful on, I know this is a pre-election year, and there's a lot of thinking and focus around the policy making for both gig, entrepreneurship, and rethinking measurements. Any insights you can share in that context? I don't think Prajita is
Can you hear me, Sanjay?
Not very clearly. So maybe you can switch off your camera and we'll come back to you after a few round of questions, because I think your video is stuck. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can see you now.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So just a question.
Just
a question picking up on what Prajita said, and this is open to all the speakers, but this is also picks up on something that Yamini and Gayatri talked about on informality. I think there's so much of attention on gig work, and Yamini, you mentioned that is gig work just a new way of rebranding informality. There's also been a lot of thinking around both measurement, defining it structurally. So a silver bullet solution would be then, how can informality just be formalized and count? But as Ajayta said, the opportunity cost is typically too high and there's a huge barrier to entry. In your experience, both from a practitioner and as working with funders, what's the appetite for both the government, philanthropic sector to fund initiatives that promote gig work or that enable gig work and informal businesses? Our experience has been very mixed because unfortunately it doesn't follow conventional definitions. So the simple question is, if I had a limited pocket of resources and if I was one of these stakeholders, a government or funder, and I could make a bet in informal or gig, would I make that bet?
Should I let Gayatri go first? Or sorry, was that question for Gayatri?
It's for all three of you.
Okay, all of us. All right.
Hard question.
All right. Why don't you go ahead, Gayatri?
Yamini, let me take you on that. So I think preference for funders and for policy for sure is full-time work. So the moment they say get work which is above 8,000 and above is full-time work. Preference is for full-time work. In fact, government schemes openly say it. They say we want pay slips, which is full-time work. As far as gig is concerned, I think there is a lack of understanding. So there is a lot of, saying, okay, if you associate with, I'm going to call out a few company names simply for ease of conversation. But if they're with urban company, then it's okay. It's gig, whether it's urban company or whether it's XYZ, it is gig. But they make a distinction between job work and outsourced work and gig. And I fail to understand why, because in both cases you will not have pay slips. So, my take would be that there is for both philanthropy, CSR, as well as policy, there's a preference for full-time work. When they think of self-employed or gig, I think is still, it's in the gray. People still haven't figured it out. But for self-employed, I think the worry is the low entry barrier and the ease of exit which can happen. So I don't think there's enough work which has happened to define how will you really do it. So it's a measurement problem which is actually making us a bit lazy to understand that that's possibly the supplementary income that that can both support the woman as well as the family.
Thanks. Yamini, Ajayta, thoughts?
Sure. All right. So 2 or 3 thoughts. One, I think from the policymaker perspective, I would say there's actually a lot of attention for informal workers, informal self-employed women, etc., etc. It's just not about work, right? Like a lot of that is around social protection. And there have been, as Gayatri rightly said, there have been many, many issues and challenges with regard to providing services, credit when it comes to, or any kind of financial resilience that one can think of. It's very dependent on certain kinds of formal recognition of your income or formal recognition of some sort of economic activity that you're doing. On the other hand, if we take a more welfare lens, I think there's the BPL, sort of the DBT sort of transactions have really transformed incomes flowing into poor households overall. And I think about 20 years ago, there was also this move to actually create individual sort of entitlements for women, and more recently, individual bank accounts for women. So a lot of these are actually pretty momentous, transformative things for us as a society. How have we leveraged them is the second question. But I think a lot of the readiness to sort of be able to reach individual women, break open that household account, the household as the sole unit of welfare activity or income generating activity, I think that change has already been put in place. The fact now the second issues in terms of effective use, skills to sort of use your bank account, the access barriers, whether banks will come to rural women, all of that is a whole other set of ecosystem issues. But I think the stroke of the pen kind of change, if we try to see, I think this has been huge. I mean, pensions going to women, recognizing single women's pensions, these are all, there are a lot of like different things in the ecosystem, and it's up to us to connect those dots on the policy side. The second big policy push I'm seeing is this e-Shram registrations. Now, a lot of people have lots of different opinions around it, but I think for me, what I see as a strong positive is the first time there is a government registration of informal workers, and that already to me is a pathway to some kind of a formalization, or at least semi-formalization, let's say. Now, what does it get those who register is the question that we need to, as TQH, as those who are like involved in the policy space, Gayatri, all of us, or even practitioners like Ajay, like I think we have to push to make that count, right? And so on the back end, I think there's a lot of work happening on integrating, the welfare system, the DBT system, the e-Shram system, the worker system. I think these have all just been historical legacy sort of fragmented ways in which governments have accessed their constituency, right? Like different line ministries have tried to access them. But I think what e-Shram does is give you a different lens altogether. And I think it can be a huge aggregator if we're able to bring and crowd in other kinds of solutions around that, both policy solutions as well as market solutions. The third thing I'd say about gig is, I think to me, gig is a proxy. The kind of attention to gig is, yes, there is greater, casualization of work. There is greater, perhaps, many have written this is actually feminization of work as a whole, because you're de-skilling, you're reducing the organized ways in which even male workers are accessing work, right? So it's not just about a woman, it's not a woman phenomenon alone. I think this whole gigification of work and the workplace is about something much bigger. That's a transformation in the market. Now, again, it's up to us to catch those tailwinds and say, if digital is enabling aggregation of demand in a particular way, and that's what I see as the platform economy piece of gig, right? Then it's up to philanthropy and it's up to us as practitioners to really go after that and see how do we solution in a way that you're able to access vulnerable, poor, who are actually in the workplace, women who are in the workplace or in the workforce, actually connect in with that. So I think that's the sort of framing for me. And I think in terms of philanthropic capital, again, very much fragmented in terms of, okay, there's a financial program, there is a skilling program, but how does that all come together? And I think it's never been about segments in some ways, right? In terms of a strategic framing, you look at segments as philanthropy. But in terms of solutions, you're looking at these specific solutions as opposed to that bundle of sticks that we need. Women need as much roads and, bus services and bus passes as they need financial inclusion, financial services, that pipeline of credit. They need many, many things. So I think this is where I think it's an exciting moment. I think COVID has really transformed how we've sort of approached any of these issues. And I remain optimistic that there is a path forward where one can actually take more bundled approaches, because I think what this is actually transformed for us is how much tech can be leveraged for poor and how much tech can be leveraged to reshape markets for the poor. And so I remain optimistic that this is where philanthropic capital can and is probably thinking about making that shift, because they understand tech. They understand, they understand different pieces of it. And it's up to us to sort of build that, bring that together and sort of talk about how do you platformize the solutions, not just the populations and the problems, right? So that's how I would sort of see it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll jump in on two elements just to kind of taking this forward with a more tangible, again, building off of everything that's already been said, right? So I think that there is massive convergence when it comes to government and actually looking at the opportunity of really thinking about, I think our definitions of labor, I think, are shifting like crazy. And I think that there's a massive opportunity to really look at entrepreneurship, livelihoods, informal economies, all of it. And I think that there's a massive convergence on policy, as well as even market players thinking about where they can come in more significantly to build opportunities. There's technology, there's data, there's all of it. I think the challenge ultimately is between getting the different systems to align, to understand why we all need each other, to be able to work together differently. So civil society, government, and market players, the three of us, if we join forces in the right way to understand where we can actually help build from each other, learn together, and actually unlock potential of capital, is such a huge opportunity. And honestly, given India's context of who we are, this is such a game changer if you think about this even on a global perspective. However, to make all of that happen, it requires different kinds of capital. And I think that's probably been the struggle for even someone like us, right? Today, when we announce something like She Leads Bharat, which ultimately is a coalition of government, civil society, and market players coming together to go on this learning journey, to unlock opportunities for 1 million women, to help 100 million families, it takes grant capital to build convening, to ensure that we can design together, to even get 3 different systems to learn from each other, respect each other, learn about each other, and also at the same time pilot and test things that can be very disruptive and innovative that could then lead to scale. It then could potentially unlock sustainable income opportunities. It can unlock government capital. It can unlock debt capital, and then eventually market players can come in. But that journey to build that opportunity requires serious commitment from all 3 different types of funders, which ultimately today are in silos because all 3 systems are in silos. And therefore, how do we kind of bring it all together, right? Because I love the point that, I mean, what you alluded to, Yamini, which is, it's not just about the skill, like we are doing all of this work, skilling, doing this, connecting, blah, 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 blah. Who is actually bridging all of that together to make sure the right people can come in at the right time? This is a learning agenda. And I think the critical thing that I'll leave with everyone, because I know we're almost having to end, is that can we all agree that maybe the role of philanthropy is to convene and build a learning agenda so that all of us can kind of come in together with what allows us to, I love the phrase from a meeting we did yesterday, which is like, let everyone drive in their lanes in such a way that when you're all in the right lanes, you have a mass highway that actually creates efficiencies, that actually creates an outcome that will actually help us solve some of these problems that we think are complicated, but they're not. All of us are doing the right things. We're just not doing it together. And maybe that's where philanthropy can come in to fix that.
Thanks, Ajita. I think that's a perfect segue to end this, because I thought I'll just take a minute to summarize our top 3 things and a bit of a call to action on this. And someone posted this in the comments as well. It does feel like, picking up on what Gayatri said, the silver bullet is really thinking about this definition of informality and informal work and what it means, especially in the context of cohorts, regional, rural, urban, etc. Rethink supplementary incomes. And of course, very much like what Yamini says, is look at the role of tech and data in game. But I think the key takeaway from me from this is any conversation around labor force participation is really now about harmonizing all these different efforts that are going on. Each of us is doing a small piece somewhere. So the call to action really for those who are on this call, if you're a funder, is, of course, fund institutional development or alliance building, like what Ajayta said. But if you're an organization or a policymaker working in this space, it's really about, get in touch. How can we build together and bundle these approaches as one opportunity instead of each of us approaching it without any heft. So think of it as a sort of cumulative lobby that you create. But I hope this was useful. I know this did not give you a definitive answer to, how do you change the narrative? It's a much bigger conversation, but I hope it prompted you with interesting questions that reflect on your own work and help you think about how you can support others. With that, I'm going to just take a minute to thank both the Dasra team. So there's Jyotirmoy, Toshal, Akshata, Ria, and I'm sure I'm missing some other names, but thank you very much. Also, thank you, Samiksha from the game team, and sincere thanks to Dr. Gayatri, Yamini, Aprajita, Ajayta for joining today. And of course, everybody can get in touch with them. I'm sure you already are, but please feel free in case you want to take this conversation forward. Dasra also has shared a poll, so if you can take a minute and just respond to that, that'll be very helpful. Thanks so much, everyone. It was great to have you participate today.